Breaking news tonight. A missing mom's shoes, socks, and jacket found. But where's Florence? Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. Thank you for being with us.
Missing in Alaska, a young mom vanishes in the middle of the day. Her family on a restless quest for answers.
Where is missing mom Florence? Her disappearance haunting locals. Listen.
We load ourselves aboard and take off. Nome is one of those unforgettable spots in history. It sits along the beach of the Bering Sea just under the Arctic Circle.
There's a lot of red flags waving, and they're not choosing to recognize that.
Red flags waving is certainly an understatement. That's where our friend Payne Lindsey's podcast, Up and Vanish, The Midnight Sun. How did the whole thing start? Listen.
Just a few days after her 33rd birthday, Florence goes to see her sister Blair at work, but the two get into an argument and Florence leaves, obviously upset. It isn't unusual that Flo ignores Blair for a few hours after their conversation, but concern grows when Blair learns Florence didn't come home that night. Over the next 2 days, Blair texts and calls Florence dozens of times, but all of them go unanswered.
Joining me, an all-star panel to make sense of what we know regarding Florence's disappearance. But first, straight out to our friend Payne Lindsey, executive producer of Up and Vanished. I've got a question. When Florence first goes missing, the sister is the one that raised the alarm. She said it was very uncommon for Florence to ignore her calls and texts. Is that true?
That's very true. Yeah, she just fell off the map completely, and that was odd.
You know, joining us is Delilah Johnson, a very close friend of Florence's. When the sister says how unusual it was for Florence to ignore calls and texts, did you find that to be true as well?
Initially, not entirely. I kind of thought maybe her phone had died, but after several days, then it was a deep, true concern.
Delilah Johnson joining us, very close friend of Florence. Delilah, I'm trying to get a handle on Florence's personality. Now, she's a mother. Would she often just vanish for days on end? I mean, so often, Delilah, I have heard police tell anguished family and friends, oh, she's out with her boyfriend or her new boyfriend. There's not one. Or she just wants some alone time away from her children. From what I know of Florence, I find that very hard to believe. Was that her pattern? Would she go off for alone time?
No, but growing up in the Nome geographic location, I would say that, sometimes people will go out camping and you don't have reliable connection to communicate with people that maybe haven't heard from you in a day. It's not uncommon for people to maybe kind of be off grid, especially during that time of year. It's kind of like the end of the summer, so people want to try to get out of town as much as they can. So at first it wasn't super alarming, but I know that a lot of people, mostly the police department, would want to just kind of brush it off like it's no big deal.
So, Delilah, have you ever known Florence to go camping or hiking ever and leave her children behind where nobody knew how to reach her?
No, I mean, she would have given someone a heads up. This isn't routine for her to just disappear the way that this had occurred.
So, Delilah, when you state that it wouldn't be uncommon for people to go hiking or camping, actually, it would be uncommon for Florence to go hiking or camping without her children, or leave, at the very least, leaving them with no idea where their mother was.
Correct.
How old are the children, may I ask, Delilah?
She has one daughter who is about to be 11.
So, Deila, you're referring to her daughter, Alethea. Did you ever know of a single time, even once, when Florence left Alethea without knowing where she was, not there to take care of her, and people had to come over and get the daughter?
No, never.
So, Payne Lindsey joining me, the star of Up and Vanished. Payne, I'm trying to get a handle on the beginning of the timeline because, as you know, I like to start all investigations with that. It could be from the last time a text was received, if that's truly a text from the victim, or in the O.J. Simpson case, it could be where the neighbors hear the dog wailing in the middle of the night when Nicole Brown was murdered. So timelines are very tricky. But it seems like all we've got to go on here, Payne, is when the sister realized after a period of time that Florence wasn't responding. Would you agree that's where we start the timeline?
Yeah, the timeline is muddy because it took several days to realize that she's not responding, and then days have gone by from likely the moment that she went missing.
Joining me is the director of the Cold Case Foundation and, more importantly, former homicide detective who has worked over 300 homicides. By the way, he trained the very first Native American Homicide Task Force. He is the star of the YouTube channel, The Interview Room. Chris McDonough, thank you for being with us. Explain in simple terms why establishing the inception of the timeline is so important in cracking a missing person or homicide case.
Nancy, so what we would call that is an initial victimology. So what we want to do is kind of create this fact pattern in relationship to her life. And we know for a fact that she has a daughter at the time who's very young, and we can take a look at that timeline of how she handled that child and if there were any anomalies, while raising the girl.
Chris McDonough, I said in simple terms, no offense. I mean, we got to focus on why the timeline is so important. I see it like this, and tell me if I'm wrong. If I could place her alive on a certain day, then I'm not looking at who she was with the day before or the week before. I need to know where she was last seen, who she was with, where she was going. I need to find pings on her phone starting then. That's where you start the investigation. Who was she with? What was she doing? Was she in her car, somebody else's car? You can't spin your wheels in the wrong timeline. Would you agree with that much?
Oh, yeah, I agree 100% with everything you just said, because that's the starting point that you can move forward. And quite frankly, you can go backwards as well.
Take a listen to Crime Online investigator Sydney Sumner.
Unable to get in touch with her sister, Blair posts to Facebook asking if anyone's seen Florence and starts looking around town. Florence hasn't been to work or the grocery store, and neither Alethea's father or her friends have seen or heard from her. Blair feels like she's exhausted all of her leads when Naomi, a bartender at Board and Trade, messages Blair. Naomi says she last saw Florence on her birthday, but that a man in the bar says he saw Florence on West Beach with a minor the night she didn't come home.
Let's talk about the bar. Joining me, and you know him well, our friend Payne Lindsey, star of Up and Vanished, who has focused on the disappearance of Florence. Tell me about the bar. Why do so many of our cases start at a bar, Payne?
It sure does seem like it. In Nome, this is one of the few gathering places. Nome is not a huge place, but this bar is super old. It's been there a long time and is right there on Front Street, right near the water, right downtown. A popular spot for locals to go and even tourists to go. And she was seen there, and we know that because I went myself with my team and I talked to patrons. I also talked to the bartender who works there, and she recalls seeing her, and people have multiple witnesses have placed her having been there before leaving.
That night, can you tell me, Payne, was she there to meet a friend? Was she there with girlfriends? So many things can go wrong at a bar. What do we know about what occurred at the bar? Did anyone notice anything at all out of the ordinary?
Having talked to Florence's sister, it seemed like during the time of her disappearance, when she would have been at this bar, she was kind of going through her own personal life struggles and was expressing that to other people around her, friends, family, and she was there by herself, but we know that she was also surrounded by other individuals, all men, who are gold miners who are essentially traveling through, and they go in and they go out and aren't from Nome but are there
Oh
for
no, Payne. You're telling me they're
yep,
transients?
absolutely.
Okay, you're giving me a chill down my spine yet again, Payne. You're famous for giving people chills down their spines. Because I'm thinking of a case that you and I have both covered out of Florida. Jennifer Kessie. Because Kessie goes missing. You go into her place, the parents go into her place the next day when she doesn't answer calls, just like in this case. They find where her clothes are laid out to go to work the following morning. The shower's actually still damp. No sign of Jennifer. Where do transients fit into this? Payne, you're shaking your head yes? You know where? Because surrounding her condo was a lot of development down in Florida and a lot of transients building the condos. I mean,
Yep.
when they're gone, they're gone. Nobody has their name, their LKA, last known address. It's just bye. Could they be witnesses? Could they be perpetrators? They could be either of those. So you're telling me many people in the bar that night are a male, and don't fight with me about this, Payne. We all know that the perp, if there is one, is likely a male statistically. Don't start with women can kidnap and murder too. I know that. But I'm telling you that's not what happened. So she's at a bar, Payne. According to you, you've been to the bar. That night she's surrounded by a lot of guys, and many of them are transient minors. Is that right? That's a recipe for disaster, Payne Lindsey.
That's absolutely correct. And it was a recipe for disaster because that's the
Hey,
last
Payne,
known
when you
place.
went in the bar, tell me about the bar. What's it like?
It's, I mean, honestly, it's a super small place. It's old, it's dusty. You have some locals in there who seem like they spend, half their days in there. You have a couple random people who are visiting, and it seems like a consistent bar clientele that circles in and out. Now, people like the gold
Okay, I
miners who
like
come
that
in,
part, Lane. Hey, Payne, I like that part because that
yeah,
means if you see the same people, like Cheers, right? The show Cheers, you
yes,
know everybody, and they would know her, and they could give me some leads, right?
you'd think so, yeah, unless that person was harboring a secret.
You know, Payne, I've come to be very suspicious when you say things like, you'd think so. Okay, who is Florence? Let's look at that. Who is Florence? Can looking at her and her standard routine, her personality even, give me a clue? Listen.
Florence Flo Okpealuk is the youngest of 7 siblings, raised in the small village of Wales, Alaska. Florence learns to practice subsistence just as her Inupiat ancestors lived off the land. But when Florence learns she is expecting a baby girl, she decides to move about 100 miles south to the larger city of Nome so her daughter has better access to health care and education.
Authorities on a desperate mission to find a missing Alaskan mom as the FBI joins the search.
Blair reports Florence missing at 6:15 p.m. that evening, 2 days after she last saw her sister. 2 days after the report, searches begin for the young mom. Nome PD and dozens of volunteers go up and down West Beach, searching for any sign of Florence. FBI agents and canine units eventually join the search, and one more piece of Florence's clothing is discovered, but there's no other leads on Florence Okpealuk.
Socks and shoes left behind of a missing mom, but where is Florence? You may be sitting down, but you may need to lay down for what you're about to hear, the working theory of the local PD. Brace yourself. Listen.
While there are many theories on what happened to Florence Okpealuk, Nome PD has released very few details on their investigation. Their only official theory is a bear attack, and they simply haven't found the body. The public has very little trust in the department, which struggles to remain staffed. Chief William Crockett agrees to an interview with Payne Lindsey, but isn't in the office at the agreed-upon time, then fails to return any calls afterwards. The FBI assisted with searches shortly after Florence's disappearance, but agents now direct anyone looking for information on her case back to Nome PD.
Okay, let me understand this. The working theory is that Florence died of a bear attack? Well, let me go straight out to veteran trial lawyer Randolph Rice joining us, former prosecutor, current criminal defense attorney, no stranger to a courtroom, and what that means is he knows evidence. Really, Randolph? So, you're going to defend a case like this, and the theory is what? That mommy took off her socks before the bear ate her?
Yeah, this looks like the Nome Police Department's attempt to sort of push this under the rug because they can't seem to put together the evidence that they need to ultimately say what happened to Florence. You know, nobody leaves the scene with their socks and their shoes and their clothes. It doesn't make sense, which leans to the probability that this was foul play. And therefore, the Nome Police Department needs to follow that foul play trail of evidence.
Somebody needs to put a fire under their rear end. Dr. Angela Arnold joining us, renowned psychiatrist out of the Atlanta jurisdiction, whose expertise is focusing on the mental and emotional welfare of women. Got a question. Dr. Arnold, do you ever get tired of police investigators, LE in general, law enforcement, and I am former law enforcement, okay? So this is a bitter pill for me to swallow. When a woman goes missing, they say, oh, she's having alone time. She's with her, whoever, you can fill in the blank, ex, boyfriend, lover, holed up in some hotel having a great time while her daughter's sitting at home trying to find something to eat. But here, they really take the cake, Dr. Angela. They say a bear ate her. I mean, if I were her family, I would want to go burn down the police department. A bear?
Well, yeah, and Nancy, and they're wasting time, and everybody knows how important those first minutes and days are in finding someone that has gone missing. Why don't they? If that's all they have to offer to the situation, then they just need to keep their mouths shut, because Nancy, that is the least helpful thing that anyone could have said in this. Okay? So now this poor woman has been missing. Any kind of evidence is gone, and all the police can come up
by
with.
the
I'll tell you
minute.
something, Nancy. Excuse me?
By the minute. The evidence
Yes,
is evaporating. Payne Lindsey, you heard what Dr. Angela Arnold had to say. Payne, is this really a working theory? No wonder the sheriff hid. What, was he under his desk when you went to interview him?
He was back there hiding somewhere. I just wish that they would shoot me straight. The job of just talking about this case with a journalist isn't that complicated, but they made it complicated because I think that they're embarrassed.
So, Payne, guys, if you don't know Payne Lindsey, you've got to listen to his podcast, Up and Vanished. He was incredible on the Tara Grinstead case, and here's his new one, In the Midnight Sun, referring to, of course, this case in Nome. Payne, let me see him. Payne, how can they say with a straight face, a bear did it?
Well, they don't say it with a straight face. They hide their face, actually. If you try to ask them that question in person, they'll say, yeah, I'll meet you tomorrow, and then they'll dodge you. I don't know how anyone could say that with a straight face. Bears don't eat jeans and shoes and cell phones and stuff like that. That's
Well, put
ridiculous.
him up. Payne, I'm sorry, I have to correct you on air. But this was a very picky bear. He took off her shoes and socks. He didn't eat them.
Right.
I mean, how they can say this with a straight face, of course, as Payne Lindsey accurately points out, they don't say it with a straight face. They hide when they say things like, a bear ate her. Deila Johnson joining us, a very dear friend of Florence's. Deila, did you hear this wacky, zany theory that a bear ate her?
Unfortunately, I hear that as a resolution to several missing people because it seems as though that's a really easy way to put a resolution on any missing person in our area.
Well, Deila Johnson is exactly correct. A bear ate fill in the blank seems to be the go-to for local law enforcement. This would be laughable if a mother wasn't missing, and I suspect very strongly that she has been murdered. Does the name Joseph Balderas ring a bell? If not, it will now. Listen.
Joseph Balderas works in Nome as a law clerk and is an avid outdoorsman who loves hiking, running, and fishing out in the country. Joseph always responds to his fiancée Megan's texts as quickly as possible, but Saturday morning, Joseph stops answering her. When Joseph doesn't show up for work Monday morning, his family knows something is seriously wrong. That afternoon, Joseph's truck is found backed into a pullout 44 miles from town. Searches turn up nothing, and Joseph's roommate is caught lying to police about his whereabouts Friday and Saturday night, but authorities chalk his disappearance up to a bear attack.
Okay. Apparently the bear can drive because the bear backed the victim's vehicle into a pullout. And there's more. Take a listen to our friends at KTVF.
A search dog unit alerted to Balderas scent about a mile down the road from his truck, but lost the trail soon after. Search pilots reported a noticeable amount of bear activity in the area, but his family has suggested that they suspect foul play.
Payne, help me. How can this stand? How can one case after the next be attributed to, quote, bear activity? There's no evidence. You recall, you and I have discussed many, many times the case of Suzanne Morphew, where it's claimed that a wild animal dragged her off. There's no sign of animal activity. There's no blood. There's no drag marks, which you would find if this had happened. There's no half-eaten carcass. There are no bones. There's no other clothing. Nothing to suggest that happened in any of the three cases we're talking about right now, specifically with Florence.
It's just an easy cop-out response. I mean, the thing is, like you said, if this is their theory, usually a theory is backed by some sort of information that supports that. I would entertain the bear theory if there was any evidence at all that suggested that, but there isn't. There's nothing. So that's just a blanket excuse answer for basically, in other words, I don't know or we screwed up.
Please join us on our mission to find missing people, especially children, to solve unsolved homicides. If you're on the go, catch us on your favorite podcast app where you can get all of our content where we, in our own way, seek justice.
Florence Okpealuk last seen leaving a tent on Alaska's West Beach, her family desperate for answers.
Leaving a tent on the beach? Well, that's odd because witnesses say she was last seen at a bar. Or was she with a bear? Listen.
Payne Lindsey, host of the Up and Vanish podcast, travels to Nome to investigate Florence's disappearance. Lindsey gets in contact with Nome, the bartender from Board and Trade, who got the tip from a patron that Florence was last seen on West Beach. Nome says the man came to Nome as a freelance gold miner, but also drove a taxi in town for checkers cabs. The man resided in a tent on West Beach. Nome only knew him as Oregon John.
To a very dear friend of Florence's, Deila Johnson, author of One on One. Deila, is that common that the transient miners that come to Nome live in tent villages?
Yes, the entire summer. The population of Nome, Alaska fluctuates probably 2,000 during the summer so that people think that they're going to Nome to get rich.
Okay, that's not helpful at all. Deila, I'm not saying it's not true. I know it to be true, what you just said. But to Chris McDonough, joining me, veteran homicide detective, not helpful at all, that there is an entire transient village, and that's not the first place police went or sheriffs went. Everyone else in that bar, according to Payne Lindsey, is likely a local, except for the transients, okay? So when you throw into a situation, Chris McDonough, one variable, and that being transients at the bar that night, that's where you go. The rest of the world doesn't understand that this is normal for Nome and other mining areas. People flood in for a mining season and then they disappear, just like transients disappeared from the Jennifer Kessie scene. They're there for the work and then they leave. And once they leave, you'll never find them again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that point of contact, i.e., where these old transients go, i.e., the bar potentially. But more importantly, one of the things I want to point out, Nancy, that you mentioned is there's a witness that says, well, she was last seen on the beach with a minor coming out of a tent. Well, that individual just put themselves at the beach, watching her come out of a tent. So that's a huge red flag. If it's the same guy, there you go. Let's start from there.
Man, you are so right. Listen.
Nome PD also follows up with the man who gave Blair some of Florence's clothing. The man gives cops the same story of finding her belongings outside his tent.
Payne Lindsey joining me, host of Up and Vanished, who has been investigating Florence's disappearance, even traveling to Nome to find out what he could and trying to confront local Ellie, who basically hid from him. So the female bartender, Nome, at the Board and Trade, gets a tip that Florence last seen on West Beach. What else did she learn, Payne?
She learned that she was with a specific individual who she knew by a nickname, a pseudonym. Oregon John was his name.
What can you tell me about clothing, about Florence's clothing being found?
So Oregon John was a miner, like several others who were camped out on this area of West Beach. And at nighttime, they would kind of have parties and stuff there, and they were all transient people. Flo's items, her personal items, her clothing was found outside of this man's tent. And when someone goes missing and you have her things in your possession, it would be common sense to ask this person what the hell happened. But that was never done in an official capacity in this case.
Payne, when you say her items, are you talking about the socks and shoes we've heard about, or are you talking about her bra and underwear? What was found?
There's mixed conflicting reports of that because initially it was Flo's family who was out there searching, and they're the ones who discovered that any of her items at all were in this man's possession. But he willingly gave it over to the police and to the family. The fact that he has anything of hers at all is strange because that's the last place she was. Why would she not leave with her clothes on?
Blair and several family members canvass West Beach, asking anyone who will talk to them about Florence. Eventually, a man says he saw Florence leaving a nearby tent around 4 p.m. The man asks Blair to wait a moment and rummages around inside his tent. He returns with Florence's socks, shoes, and jacket. Bewildered, Blair asks where Florence is and why he has her things. The man seems to clam up, but insists he did not bring Florence to West Beach, and he found her belongings outside his tent.
Where is Florence Okpealuk, the mom last seen leaving a gold miner's tent before vanishing into the Alaskan wilderness?
At the bar, on the beach, in a tent. Then we hear disturbing reports about a very eerie phone call made by Florence that night. Listen.
Nome PD also follows up with the man who gave Blair some of Florence's clothing. The man gives cops the same story of finding her belongings outside his tent and turns over one more item, Florence's cell phone. Law enforcement never publicly divulges if anything found on the phone provided new leads, but according to a local with friends on the search and rescue team, Florence made a troubling call to a friend that night, saying, quote, "I'm in the bushes with some people. They're passing something around, and I don't feel safe."
With me, close friend of Florence's, her confidant, Delilah Johnson, author of One of Our Own. Delilah, thank you for being with us. What do you know about this phone call made by Florence?
That it's terrifying, that it does kind of provide more than just speculation on what maybe had occurred that evening.
To Payne Lindsey, who has been investigating Florence's disappearance. Payne, what do we know about the call? Who did she call, and how do you decipher what she said?
She was clearly scared. She was in a state of distress, and she names being with multiple individuals. Now, I know these people's names. I have not publicly stated all of them because some of them I'm still talking to. Um, but collectively here, you have a group of men who were the last people to see Florence alive, and then she simply vanishes. These people need to be questioned by law enforcement. The fact that they haven't been is ridiculous.
Payne, it's like the Tara Grinstead case all over again. What can you tell me about another conflicting story, Payne? A story that another witness states that Florence was with his neighbor the night before, driving on the beach on an ATV, all-terrain vehicle. And then the witness sees the neighbor returning, and Florence wasn't there. It was just the neighbor.
Bottom line is, you can sit here and look at all the different conflicting stories and theories. When you whittle it all down, which I've done my best to do here, what stays true is that she was at the bar, then she left and went to West Beach, no matter how she got there, and she has never been seen since then. If her body is
Do
not
you
on
believe
West
those
Beach,
witnesses, Payne? Do you
I
believe the witnesses
believe
that place
that the
her?
timing of everything may not be perfect, right? I think that the bottom line is she was there. There's physical evidence that she was there. Her stuff is there. So
Her
we know
clothes
for a fact that
and her
she
cell
was
phone.
there and people saw her. Correct. And it was outside of a specific tent, not just any tent. We know whose tent it was. Why do you have her stuff? I don't have any missing person's stuff outside of my tent.
Payne Lindsey, in addition to the time that the local LE, I guess the sheriff, didn't show up for an interview, it's an eerie reminder for me, the Natalie Holloway case. Beth Twitty and I went back, as you know, to Aruba to try to scare up some more leads. And it was
Hmm.
there. We drove by a structure, Payne, and she said, yeah, I sat in there for 5 hours waiting to speak to the chief of police. They told me he was at the barber shop. They told me this. They told me that. After 5 hours, he walks out, not realizing she's still sitting there, rubbing his stomach because they had just brought him food. So he wouldn't have to see her. He ate in his office and then ran into her. I mean, that sounds like what's happening now with them ducking you. As a matter of fact, you're not the only one he's ducking. Listen, Payne.
Months into the search for Florence Okpealuk, her best friend Delilah and sister Blair hold a march for missing and murdered Indigenous people through downtown Nome, ending in a local gymnasium for several speakers to highlight their loved ones. While Blair speaks, expressing concern for the lack of police investigation through heart-wrenching sobs, the Nome PD chief makes an appearance, shocking the crowd. But the chief isn't there for the event. He calmly walks past the crowd to the gym equipment for his workout.
Delilah Johnson, tell me what happened.
You know, it's already a challenging time because we are having to honor those that aren't with us anymore. And a lot of the time there's a lot of systemic injustice. But when we were specifically honoring Florence Okpealuk, And then we also notice that the chief is there for a workout. That was also just heart-wrenching for us, because we would love to have the entire community, all law enforcement, search and rescue, all community leaders, all people within the community come together, because it's an isolated area. And so if we can all help one another and support one another, I think there would be better relationships, and the lack of trust probably wouldn't be such a stain on the community members.
Payne Lindsey, I'm just having a horrible time understanding the sheriff while family and friends are out there bringing awareness to Florence's disappearance. He walks up like he's going to the vigil and then just keeps walking and goes to the gym to work out.
I mean, come on, bro. Even if giving him the benefit of the doubt, that is just the biggest lack of awareness I've ever seen. Clearly, you do not care about this case. Clearly, if you didn't know this was happening, you're not actively investigating it. All that tells me is that hand over the damn case file then, because you're not doing anything about it, and you're comfortable being rude in public and sending this strange message to people who are fighting for justice right here out in the open in your own town.
Who is this so-called Oregon John, his moniker, that was last seen with Florence? Well, this is what we've learned about him.
It turns out Oregon John has 93 arrests in Nome. The charges include everything from disorderly conduct, criminal trespass, harassment, probation violation, and cruelty to animals, to thefts, assaults, and 2. Oregon John appears to be very dangerous, and with John having Florence's socks, shoes, jacket, and cell phone, he may very well be the last person to see her.
Payne Lindsey joining us, who has spent so many months investigating Florence's disappearance. Where is he now?
I know exactly where he is. I'm not going to say it on live air right now, because mostly because you have a lot of listeners and viewers, and so do I. I don't want the Good Samaritans to go spook this guy anymore. But I'm in communication with him, and I have maintained that. He has questions that need answers, and everything points back to Oregon John. You can dive down a million rabbit holes, but you must explain why he had her things. And look at who we're talking about here. 93 different offenses, cruelty to animals. These aren't petty offenses. This is a big, this paints a character of somebody who is dangerous.
Between him walking free with 93 offenses and the sheriff hiding under his desk when you try to interview him, Chris McDonough joining me, veteran homicide detective and star of The Interview Room on YouTube. Chris, in any other universe other than Nome, Alaska, this guy would be alone in a jail cell under the jail. But instead, he's out free, having long chats with Payne Lindsey.
Yeah, and he's dangerous. And the fact that this guy's an apex predator is what we'll call him. And I think if they took cadaver dogs within probably 50 yards of that tent, they may really want to focus very clearly in that particular geographic type of profile. And by the way,
Chris,
he hasn't
please
stopped.
spare me. Any evidence that would have been near that tent is long gone. It's on the beach.
Except for her body. He's not taking her body.
Payne Lindsey, is Florence's case going to end up like all the others out of Nome, where there is no resolution and they end up just saying bear attack?
No, it's not. Mostly because of people like Deila in the community and our team and you keeping this case alive. The bottom line is, I tried to talk to local police. They didn't want to. They're not going to be able to help me anyways. I bet you their case file is literally a paragraph on a page. They haven't done anything actively. We don't need them to help us. The bottom line is, at this point, based on their history, I mean, A known police officer killed a woman one time. They don't have a good track record here. Someone from the state agency or even the FBI, because they do this in small towns like this in Alaska, needs to step in and look at this objectively and say, hey, let's try to figure this out. There's a lot of red flags waving, but they're doing nothing about it. If anything, they're hindering journalists like myself from uncovering more truths.
You know, you mentioned one of the LE there actually being responsible for a disappearance. That was Sonia Ivanov that we were just discussing, who vanishes. But Payne, there are so many others as you are uncovering. Guys, his podcast, amazing, Up and Vanish. This is The Midnight Sun. Many people attribute Payne to cracking the case of Tara Grinstead, and I pray to God this case will also be cracked. Deila Johnson joining us, a very dear friend of Florence's. Her little girl still wanting mommy. Deila, I don't want Florence's case to just be another statistic in Nome, Alaska, where they end up a year from now going, oh yeah, closed case, Bear did it.
Me neither. And I'm so grateful for all of the platforms available to raise awareness around this case, because oftentimes it is not well covered in the news and in any media. So it has been wonderful, because I know that law enforcement feels the pressure, and there has been a lot of tension within the community based on a lot of the talk around town now. And I think that it has brought a lot of other conversations where previously community members were nervous to speak about this, and now it's becoming more of a comfortable conversation.
If you know or think you know anything about the disappearance of Florence or about so-called Oregon John, I beg you, dial 907-443-5262. Repeat, 907-443-5262. We wait as justice unfolds, God willing, in the disappearance of Florence. And now we remember American hero Deputy Sheriff Watasha Carter, Birmingham PD, U.S. Army Air Force vet. Deputy Sheriff Carter shot and killed in the line of duty, survived by wife, now widow, Tiffany, and children, Dashay and Talon. American hero, Deputy Sheriff Watasha Carter. Thank you to our guests for being with us, especially Payne Lindsey and Deila Johnson, but also to you for being with us tonight and every night. Nancy Grace signing off. I'll see you tomorrow night, 6 and 9 o'clock, sharp Eastern. And until then, good night, friend. Please join us on our mission to find missing people, especially children, to solve unsolved homicides. If you're on the go, catch us on your favorite podcast app, where you can get all of our content, where we, in our own way, seek justice.